Hello, Music 110. This is a video version of the podcast. And this is going to be going over some things in the textbook. There's a textbook for lessons 14 through 17, which we're moving back to rhythm for a little bit. And then I'm going to move forward with lessons 26 through 30, which has to do with the scales. Okay, let's start with 14. 14 is pretty basic. You'll find that a lot of different music notation examples have to do with making shorthands or shortcuts. So sometimes in some of the music that we look at, you'll see repeat signs and something called first and second endings. Basically, it's pretty self-explanatory here in the textbook. If you see a double bar, two bar lines, one is thicker with two dots, that means you're you're repeating a section. When it's just at the end and there's no beginning repeat sign, you're going back to the beginning. That's in the first example. When there is a pair of them and you have the two dots facing each other essentially, then you're going back to the first repeat sign to start the repeat. For some of the music that we look at, you might also see something called a first and second ending. Basically here, you're following the music along until you hit a repeat sign, and then you're going to go back to wherever it's going to start repeating, and then instead of continuing on as was before, you're skipping over to the bracket number 2. Take a look at this. I think this is pretty self-explanatory with the textbook, but take a look at it and we'll talk about it briefly next week. The next two lessons have to do with eighth notes and eighth rests, and we talked about this briefly when we were looking at the song by Pink, and we're trying to divide a beat. So far in our rhythm talk, we've just been talking about notes that are essentially one note per beat, and so when we're dividing a beat into two notes, two equal notes, ta da ta da ta da, something like that, then we're looking at possibly using eighth notes. Again, whether or not you use one type of note to represent one beat is really depending on the time signature. So yeah, that's just a quick reminder, and we'll talk about that. Hopefully, this will be a little more clearer as we go along. But for right now, understand that eighth notes and eighth rests are essentially the same concept that we've been talking about. And two eighth notes equal one quarter note. So same thing, two eighth rests equal one quarter rest. Finally, to round up rhythm in lesson 17, we introduce one more dotted note. This is a dotted quarter note. And so if you remember the dotted half note, the dot increases the duration of the note by half its original value. So a half note plus a quarter note. So 3 equals to 3 quarter notes. Here in a dotted quarter note, it's the same concept. The dot equals half the value of the quarter note. So that means we're adding an eighth note to the length. And this is the start of something we call syncopation, which is a lot of syncopated rhythms where it accents the offbeats use the dotted quarter note. Okay, we'll take a look at next lessons 26, 27, and 28. From the lecture today, and you can review what happened under lecture recordings on Blackboard, we discovered that there's a pattern that governs a lot of the songs that we listen to, from Happy Birthday all the way to John Bellion's Hand of God, which is what we listened to today. The pattern here has to do with a sequence of half steps and whole steps. We start with a pattern called a tetrachord, which is 4 notes, and in that tetrachord, the pattern of whole steps and half steps is whole, whole, half. And this pattern is repeated twice. So on page 43, lesson 26, you can take a look at the C major scale, which lists the two tetrachords. The C tetrachord and the G tetrachord, they're connected together by a whole step. So overall, this pattern that emerges is called a major scale. Okay, so that's how we figure out the major scale. And to step back a little bit, basically, there are lots of notes on the keyboard, and we're trying to figure out how a songwriter or a composer determines which notes of the keyboard to use for their melody so that they sound cohesive together. They sound like they're in the same realm of sound, and this is a collection of pitches. So they're not just random, but they're actually a collection of pitches that are related to a scale. And so that's the first type of this collection that we're talking about in this class is the major scale. And this is how we find it. Two tetrachords connected to together by a whole step. The whole pattern again is whole, whole, half, whole, and then whole, whole, half. Okay. If you turn the page to lesson 27, 28, here the exercises are asking you to write your own scales, your own major scales, starting on G, D, F, and B flat. And you'll see that as you go along, what you'll need to do is use accidentals, flats and sharps, to adjust the notes so that they come out like the pattern. Okay, so for example, in the G major scale, you'll see that we added an F sharp. Okay, so that's needed to make that pattern work. Also, similarly, in the D major scale, we're adding a F sharp and a C sharp. Note that in the B flat major scale, we're starting with a flat, okay, because we're naming scales by that first note. Okay, so B flat major scale starts with a B flat. And all four of these scales follow the exact same pattern as we've done today. Again, that's two tetrachords, whole, whole, half, connected together in the middle by a whole step. Finally, if you turn the page to lesson 29, 30, this is a new thing that, that I'd like you to take a look at. And what we're looking at here is something called a key signature. So far, we've learned 4 different scales that uses flats and sharps. So that's G, D, F, and B flat. To denote this in real music, we use something called a key signature right in the beginning of each system of the staff to remind the player that, hey, all of these sharps that are noted are in play throughout the whole piece. So that you don't have to write out the same F sharp over and over and over again for a piece that only uses the G major scale. There's a specific pattern of sharps and flats that we use for something for this key signature. So take a look at the material here on 29 and 30 and try your hand at writing out the key signature. And you should be able to mirror pretty closely to what's on the page in your exercises. You will also have further chances to practice this using Musician software, and please practice the levels that I've posted on Blackboard, and write up journal entries as you work on both the workbook, the textbook, and the software. If you'd like, take a look just a little briefly ahead of time to lessons 31 and 32, and we'll be wrapping up next week with a discussion of all of the major scales. But so far, I'm just starting with the ones in this group at the moment. So C major, G major, D major, F major, and B flat major, which includes up to 2 sharps and 2 flats. Okay. Good luck with this. I think you'll have fun, and I will see you next week.